Hello, Sandra, are you there? Your mic is muted.
Thank you. You too. It's been a while.
Hey.
Hello.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
I'm Joanne, by the way.
Nice to meet you. And it's
Likewise.
two monitors, so if I'm looking this way, I'll try and stay this way. I should just turn that off, but
Okay, let me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make you the host.
okay.
And then now you may be asked to accept. Oh, no, it just says that you're the host now. And now you can share your screen. Do you know how to do that?
Agent Ennis, my name's Greg Cannell. I think we've spoke before. It's nice to meet you.
Right. Put a name to a face.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Greg.
No worries. And just to let you guys know, we are recording this part of the meeting as well. It says it's recording. So
it's Sandra, if you want to revert back to me, I can go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay. And how do I revert?
Okay, so if you go to the bottom part, it'll say participants.
Uh-huh.
And you click on that. You see that? And then it should,
oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then you see my name, I'm Joanne. So you, if you hover, it should say mute or more. Go to the more, and it'll,
Make host.
Great. Now I'm the host, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
yeah, thinking about it now, I don't know if it would change my introduction any, but it would be nice to know.
Do we need to resend out the link to the UCAP emails, given some of the problems that we've been having with the IT email?
That might not be a bad idea.
Agent Ennis, I'm now going to give you hosting permissions.
Okay, great.
Right now, we just have our team on right here, so I think we're waiting for a few other people to join.
Agent Ennis, you may have individuals coming into the waiting room. Go ahead and admit all.
Okay, and does it pop up for me?
It should.
Look at the participants.
If you would like to revert back to me as host, I can go ahead and see whether or not there are people in the waiting room.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I don't see anybody in the waiting room. Perfect.
While we're waiting to Agent Ennis, towards the end, are you planning to take any question and answer?
I am.
Okay. Sometimes people will type in the chat box the questions. If you want, I can go ahead and read those out to you, keep track of those. And if you want to just keep track of all the live ones, and then I'll pipe up when we get some questions from the chat and there's a lull in all the live questions, if that works for you.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, Agent Ennis, I've made you co-host so that I can monitor both chat and the waiting rooms should they occur.
Perfect. Thanks.
Just so you're aware, we are seeing your notes and everything. So we're seeing it in your presentation view, not in Well, in your view, not the presentation view.
Okay, and there shouldn't be any, so.
Okay. Well, what we can see is we can see the current slide and then the next slide is what it has.
Okay, I'm wondering how, would that be display settings?
Probably just duplicate the slideshow. Or
Yeah,
swap presenter view and slideshow.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that to my attention.
And I did just send out the link to everyone, to all the directors, because I assume that's who was invited.
That's my understanding. It could be board members as well.
Okay.
So far, we only have one other member than staff. So if you're okay waiting just a tiny bit, we'll see if that email gets anybody else in.
Sure.
Maybe we'll give people about 2 more minutes. So about 2:07, we'll plan on getting started around there and see how many we can get by then. Well, we got a few more. Guess we can go ahead and get started so we don't use up all your time. Well,
No,
welcome,
it's fine.
everybody.
Thank you.
Glad to have Special Agent Sandra Ennis with us today. She'll be speaking on identifying fraudulent activity in charter schools. A little background about Agent Ennis. She's been investigating white collar fraud for 17 years. 11 of those years have been with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Inspector General, working out of Denver, Colorado. Agent Enos's experience include investigating a variety of education fraud cases such as charter school and public corruption cases and complex student aid fraud rings. Prior to this, Agent Ennis was a postal inspector with the United States Postal Inspection Service based out of Los Angeles, California. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado and holds a certified fraud examiner's license. Agent Ennis is a special agent from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Inspector General, and she's presenting today her PowerPoint presentation on identifying fraud. So we're very lucky to have you here. Appreciate you taking the time, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you. And I'll go ahead and stop my video and mute myself. And we ask that questions be held for Agent Ennis until she indicates that she's ready to take them.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation to speak with you all today. I'm a strong believer in it takes a village, and we all have to work together to protect money that goes to our children. And like I said, it takes a village to do so. Not one of us can do it alone. I will give my disclaimer. I'm not technologically savvy, so just bear with me. We'll do the best I can. As Greg mentioned, I'm just going to today give you a background on Department of Education OIG's organization and mission, tell you a little bit about the background of types of cases we work and what we do, current fraud trends that we're seeing. We'll speak about some of the successful charter school cases we've had in the Western region here, how you can help the OIG. I will provide my contact information at the end, and we'll have time for questions. OIG organization. So if you're not familiar, every government agency has an Office of Inspector General. It's almost a watchdog component of the department. Housing, Urban Development, FDA, Agriculture, they all have OIGs. Department of Justice has one. And like I said, we're kind of a watchdog. We are an independent component of the Department of Education, but we're also a part of in that is to examine allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse, and pursue those who seek to enrich themselves. In a nutshell, our job is to protect taxpayer dollars. What gives us this authority is the Inspector General Act of 1978. It was created to ensure that government programs run efficiently and, again, to detect fraud, waste, and abuse. The Department of Education OIG has three components. It has an audit component, investigations, which I'm an investigator for Department of Education. And we also have our crime investigation division, and I'll tell you a bit about those. So our audit services are typically auditors who they audit U.S. Department of Education programs. They audit state programs who receive our money. And typically, an example would be, let's say I'm working something in Albuquerque. So Albuquerque School District has something going on with how they're using our money. So our auditors will get in touch with the state to ensure, as you can see on the other side of the slide, that they're practicing adequate internal controls to ensure our federal money is being used appropriately. Is the program eligible to receive the federal fund? Salaries, non-salaries. And a lot of times when you're the recipient of federal funding, there's some requirement to gather data to ensure either progress on a grant or to ensure that the grant funds are being used to ensure success of the children. So they look at that type of stuff. Our technology crimes division, it's a TACI, or we refer to them as TCD. They conduct investigations, as you can see, into the unauthorized access. At times, their job, they help assist, protect, say, intrusions in U.S. Department of Education databases. So let's say federal student aid, individuals submit their free application for federal student aid. They ensure that appropriate security measures are put in place. At times, if there is an intrusion, they will investigate that. You can kind of see there, they want to ensure administration, processing disbursement, originating from the department isn't handled inappropriately. Our TC division is comprised of the groups you see below. They are made up of special agents. These special agents do the intrusion investigations. At times, you'll hear about maybe a student getting access to a college, say, grading system and changing grades. They do those types of investigations. We have IT computer specialists who assist us, the agents, with our investigations. We also have a group who, let's say I'm doing my investigation and I'd like some link charts created. They assist us with that. As an investigator, part of investigating fraud is following the money. So we have financial analysts who help schedule bank records when warranted, or a lot of times, school accounting is different than other accounting methods. So we have financial analysts that can help us with that as well. There's an electronic crimes team, as I mentioned, a data team. This data team will also at times, we have access to US Department of Education. How can I say this? We have access to, it wouldn't be relayed to you guys as much, but COD, which is used in the disbursement of Title IV, which is federal student aid. So they'll go in and they'll do some data mining. They'll look for suspicious activity. And then we also have a forensic laboratory. Those individuals, as an investigator, at times we do search warrants. We take in digital evidence, and these individuals help us with the review of that information. And then there's the component that I work with, or I fall under. I am a federal law enforcement officer. At OIG, agents are federal law enforcement officers. I think the easiest way to understand what we do is we are the equivalent of an FBI agent. The only difference is our authority, our jurisdiction is limited to US Department of Education funding. So anything involving US Department of Education funding, we have authority to investigate. Not only do we do criminal investigations, we do civil ones, again, involving federal student aid, diploma mill, corruption, fraudulent billing contracts. So you'll have vendors who receive our money, grantees. A lot of people, and especially in the day of COVID and pandemic money, a lot of money goes out, and we have oversight in how that money can be spent. Let's see, most of the time we try to have let's say there's enough evidence, there's criminal activity involved. Our goal is to take our cases to the US Department of Justice, the US Attorney's Office. We work closely with them in pursuing individuals who choose to defraud the education system. We also have a hotline where individuals can call and either make anonymous complaints, or you can call and say your name. In the event you can't get a hold of a regional investigator, the OIG hotline is one avenue to report fraud. We also work with the US Department of Education in instances where we'll do an investigation and maybe we'll see how things can be done better. So we will work with the department. An example of this would be, again, going back to student aid fraud. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of personal identifying information, a lot of identity theft. with the FAFSA program. So we work with them and kind of suggest ideas of how to make things better. And like today, we conduct outreach and provide fraud briefings on how to identify fraud and to get to hopefully collaboratively work. I think the goal for all of us is prevention. And so in doing outreach and briefings, we hope to help or at least work together to prevent fraud. Here's a map, and you can see the stars. That's where we have offices located. We're pretty spread out. We're not a very large OIG. To give you an example, Health and Human Services, I think, is one, if not the largest OIG. Anyway, sorry, that little ding. Squirrel moment, but anyway, sorry. So here's the map of where we have these offices. I'm part of the Western region. You see that star in Colorado. There's 2 agent and an ASAC in Colorado. I would say at this time right now, there's 7 agents working in the Western region, 3 management. So there's 10 of us, and we cover that entire green area. Like I said, we're not a huge OIG. I would say there's maybe 75 of us nationwide covering the entire country. Even in Colorado alone, we cover Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and New Mexico. I even have cases in Hawaii. So kind of the work dictates where we go for our casework, but lots of travel required. Give you some insight into the types of investigations we do and remedies, our goal of our investigations. We have investigative priorities. Being a small OIG, we can't work everything that comes in the door. So we tend to focus on public corruption. Fraud involving charter schools is very important. Charter management organizations, I'm sure all of you are aware, charter schools, unfortunately, at times become involved in a lot of fraudulent activity. And we hopefully talk a little bit more about that here. And then Title IV fraud, again, that is the largest entitlement program in the U.S. Department of Education. That's where I would say the brunt of our work comes from because so much money goes out. I haven't, unfortunately, due to COVID, we usually get an update of, how much money goes out every year. And those numbers just, I think the focus is now all this pandemic funding. But I know at one time it's, 9 billion, or I think it's $9 billion a year for federal student aid. It's again, the largest program. So lots of fraud in that arena. And then also total and permanent disability discharge fraud is an area of interest for our agency. And this is just to give you a background. So when U.S. Department of Education disperses money to the state, there's formula grants, and we tend to see what typically maybe the charter schools or just local education agencies are recipients. And some of you may or may not be familiar. It's 21st century. Those tend to be after school programs, charter school funding, whether it be buildings or the startup charter school funding. At times we see some fraud there. Career and technical education, that's at one time was called Perkins funding. Again, that's like your trade school funding, English language acquisition, impact aid, Indian education. I don't read from the slide, but basically you can see lots of programs that we investigate. And these are the ones that typically go through the state and through some formula get dispersed to local education agencies and charter schools. Where do we get our work from? Various sources. Like I mentioned before, we have our hotline. Auditors at time will be out doing an audit and they'll find something questionable, so they'll refer something to our office. At times, the U.S. Department of Education will be given, we have our hotline complaint. We'll also program offices within the Department of Education may receive allegations of something questionable. School employees, officials, you can see vendors, contractors, subcontractors, grantees, when you have competing vendors, even private citizens. And we see this sometimes with charter schools, parents who are concerned about how the school is being run. Working in Hawaii, we've had quite a few charter school allegations come in from there. And at times, like I said, it can be private citizens. And we work closely with FBI because we are a small agency. We tend to partner with other law enforcement agencies so that, it truly takes a team effort to do these investigations. They're complex, require a lot of financial analysis. It takes a long time. So, and it's great when you can collaborate with FBI or, like I said, another OIG. We notice at times if they're stealing from one pot of money, say a pot of money within the Department of Education, they're potentially stealing from another pot. So in an instance of charter school investigations, we'll see maybe a free lunch program, or USDA will provide some construction type grants or loans. So we do investigations with agriculture OIG. I've worked cases with the state before, KETAM or other civil actions. We don't see too many of those. We tend to see more of those with the federal student aid and schools conduct. I'm trying to think of an example. Like a school shuts down or they're recruiting. We see a lot of KETAMs when you have schools recruiting people, and then they'll maybe recruit ghost students. So, again, fraudulent activity. I have never seen one with a charter school. We'll also receive referrals from local education agencies and state education agencies. And I know for states at times, every state is different. I know here in Colorado and probably Utah, there might be a requirement for you to report something to the state. At times, we also will get involved because of the federal funding aspect. And we'll get, in working with state auditors, we get cases that way. So lots of ways that matters are referred to us. Who we investigate, school officials, which is always unfortunate, whether it be local school districts, intermediate units, vendors for local education agencies. I've worked quite a few matters, again, in Hawaii and New Mexico these last couple of years, where there's some really questionable vendor conduct. Education grantees, again, I'm trying to think of an example. I worked a case in Utah once where there was a English, I can't even recall the program. This was clear back in 2012. It was in English, a program set up to help migrants learn English. And the bookkeeper at the agency took it upon herself to embezzle a lot of money for her own personal enrichment. So, we'll get to that in a moment. But again, ed grantees, state education employees, we see that at times, not too often, because normally state education employees, hopefully there's enough controls put in place. They don't really have direct access to funding. And we also have an internal crimes group who they're located in our headquarters office, and they investigate U.S. Department of Education employees. Those cases, unfortunately, tend to be, say, misuse of a laptop. I'm sure, you know, with most agencies, we have to be mindful not to gamble on our laptops, or unfortunately, you'll see child exploitation cases. But again, hopefully those are far and few between. So when we're conducting our investigations and there's merits to the allegation, we hope to have some successful outcome, whether it be administrative, civil, or criminal. And I won't go into too much length, but administrative is typically, at times, one, we can't work everything, or unfortunately, there just may not be enough criminal or civil. There's not enough evidence to take the matter criminally or civilly. And what will happen is, at times, then we will report it back to the U.S. Department of Education and say, hey, we found some anomalies in this program. You may want to do an audit, or in the case of, I know, federal student aid, there'll be some misuse of money. So the department will do what's called heightened monitoring. That does happen also. So when the U.S. Department of Education gives money to a state, and then the state disperses it to a local education agency, the department at times steps in and is like, okay, there's been misuse here, and therefore we need to monitor the grant a little more closely. A lot of times, and this is typically in criminal cases, it's not easy to get suspension and debarment. So once someone's been indicted for some criminal activity, we'll submit them for suspension. Suspension being they're no longer eligible to apply for federal grants. And it's not just grants within the U.S. Department of Education, it's grants across the board. And then ultimately, when someone's been sentenced, we seek debarment for that individual. And again, it's coordinating. If we're not going to be able to take any action, we'd like some coordination with the state or local agencies, just to ensure, you know, maybe a crime hasn't occurred, but there definitely needs to be oversight. So again, collaboration with individuals for prevention measures. So this is a big slide here, but there's criminal penalties and civil penalties. Criminal, I hate to read verbatim, but any person who knowingly, willfully embezzles, misapplies, steals, obtains by fraud, false statement, or forgery, fails to refund any funds. This actual bullet point here. So U.S. Department of Education has its own statute with regards to Title IV fraud. An individual committing Title IV again being federal student aid, so Title IV of the Higher Education Act. An example would be a case I worked here in Colorado. The individual stole identities of prison inmates, and one of the potential charges would be this Title IV fraud, which I didn't mention the statute on this PowerPoint because it doesn't apply. But U.S. Department of Education does have its own statute. Typically, persons convicted of a felony shall be fined not more than $20,000. The main takeaway for being charged criminally is we have to show intent. Intent, the person did it purposefully. It wasn't a mistake. They actually took actions in committing the fraud. And typical criminal charges we see are conspiracy, that being more than one, a lot of false statements in grant applications. And I'll go into that more in a bit, false statements about eligibility to participate in a program. Mail fraud is 1341. Wire fraud, mail fraud using the mails. That can be UPS, FedEx, US Postal Service. Wire fraud is interstate commerce. So there's a wire from a bank in Connecticut going to a bank in Utah. And if the act before it is criminal, then it's wire fraud. We'd have to do a whole nother presentation on that. Bank fraud, theft of government funds, and probably the one you see the most in charter school investigations is theft concerning federal programs. And kind of the neat thing about that statute is the theft, it has to, so if an entity receives more than $10,000 a year in federal funds, then, and there's fraud that's occurred, then the statute applies, versus it's not specific to federal money. Because at times you'll see in these investigations some commingling of in federal funds, but I won't either bore or confuse you with all that goes with the statute. And then civil is criminal. The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, where the civil statute is preponderance of the evidence. So more likely than not, the requirement to have specific intent to defraud is not required. So a little easier to prove. Let's see, what else would you take away from this? And you can see there is no specific intent to defraud the government. It's not required. The nice thing about civil cases is the penalties. There's treble penalties. So if you have civil penalties between 10,000 and 20,000 account, well, then it's 3 times that amount in damages. So it's a nice hefty hit to someone's wallet. And a lot of times in white collar cases, where does it hurt someone who is greedy enough to steal from children? Where is that going to hurt? And that's their wallet. So it's a good remedy. Just a little information here. Our statutory and regulatory access to records. In a nutshell, there's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. We call it FERPA. FERPA requires permission, say, from a parent or from an individual to release records. The Education Office of Inspector General is exempt, meaning if I'm working an investigation at a charter school, the charter school receives our money, and I provide them a letter saying, I need these records, say Title I records, or say the school receives impact aid funding, and I want records, we are exempt from the notification requirement. And this tells, how it's handled, and we provide you a letter so that it can be put in the student's file that meets the compliance requirement. And it also discloses that we will potentially share this information with Department of Justice and authorized representatives. So if we're working a case jointly with FBI and we request records, it's the potential that we will share those records with them. But again, at the end of the day, we're exempt from the notification requirement, and that those records have to be made available to us. And you see that at the top, to perform audits, to do our investigations. It gives us access to records, but also to grantee employees for interviews also. And I lost my mouse here, so bear with me a minute. Part of our job in doing investigations is we gather our evidence. Like I mentioned before, we have access to a lot of records involving U.S. Department of Education funding. We try to obtain records through consent. Not always successful at that, but you can only ask. We conduct search warrants. We can obtain records through court orders, subpoenas, whether they be grand jury. What happens is we receive an allegation. We start our investigation. At some point in time, if there's evidence that fraud has been committed, we will contact the U.S. Attorney's Office in the district where, in this instance, if I were working something in Utah, I reach out to them, say, this is what I have. If they say, yes, I think we have enough here to potentially charge someone, then what happens is a grand jury investigation is opened, and then we have authority to obtain subpoenas. Grand jury is secret. So a lot of times we'll go out and do interviews, and people will have at times more questions for us than them. And we can't share. Grand jury is secret. We tend to take more than we give. And that's to protect the investigation. And that's pretty much in a nutshell what we do.
Agent Enos, question. Are you willing to answer any questions as we go along, or would you like those to wait to the end?
How are we doing on time? Are we doing good?
Yeah, you're doing pretty good. I think we have about 20 minutes left. I can save these till the end if that's what you'd rather. And
Sure.
You can get through everything you want.
Sure. Why don't we do that?
Okay.
So I don't lose my focus.
No worries.
Okay, thank you. Just talk some fraud trends that we see. I just kind of like this saying, things are not always what they seem. The first appearance deceives many. The intelligence of a few perceives what has been carefully hidden. And you really see this in white collar, just at initial glance, things seem fine. And that's not always the case. And with white collar investigations, people are pretty savvy to hide what they're doing. And it takes some patience and time to dig away at it, I guess. What is fraud? Deliberate distortion of the truth, an attempt to obtain something of value, lying or cheating, and cheating. Why do people commit fraud? It's called the fraud triangle. There's 3 sides to that. One is opportunity. And we see that happens when there's weak controls, no oversight, or lax rules. Sometimes motivation. Doing this 17 years, it's unfortunate. A lot of times you just see people make really bad decisions. And people have stuff going on in their personal life. You can see debt, addictions, and sometimes people just have a sense of entitlement and are greedy. And then there's also the rationalization, everyone's doing it, or I work so hard at this job and I've been overlooked for promotions. I've been treated poorly and, I deserve more money. Or, well, I was just borrowing the money. I had planned to pay it back, or everyone's doing it. We see that. So always unfortunate. Just some examples of fraud schemes. So the majority is just plain fraud. You have a school employee who, like I said, makes a horrible decision, what's really sad is at times it could be there's a family member with cancer. So bills are piling up or whatever, and people just really make bad decisions and steal from their employer. Sometimes you'll see falsification of grant applications, or in the case in Utah with the bookkeeper, this individual is very savvy of creating credit card statements and altering them. And that's creating fictitious records. I'll talk about that here in a minute. A school in Arizona, falsification of attendance and enrollment. We know that with Title I or state funding, per pupil, the more pupils you have, the more money you receive. Falsification of research data, forgery, double billing, obstruction of a federal audit, expense reimbursement. We see a lot of purchasing stuff for themselves, people living a lavish lifestyle. We also see individuals who, and unfortunately it's charter schools, where you'll have family members who are doing the landscaping. And I'm not saying that's always a crime, but just there are things where at times it is a crime or something wasn't disclosed, if a conflict of interest wasn't disclosed, accepting kickbacks from vendors. I'm working a case in New Mexico where the allegation is there was a vendor and there was someone in the public school district who was accepting a kickback. I encourage these people for you to be awarded the contract through procurement, and then you see money going back to the person that kind of drove the procurement process. Bribery, bid rigging, plain extortion. We'll see fees for non-existing consulting. Sometimes even just the word consulting can be a red flag. Are they truly providing a service? Or I'll talk about that in one of the cases I worked in New Mexico, where the individual charged had created many of his own nonprofits. So, and at the end of the day, services weren't rendered for the consulting. Sorry, my mouse. Currently, we see no oversight or weak oversight by a board. And, it's hard, and it may not even be weak oversight. Maybe, I think in the education realm, we want to believe the best in everyone. We want to give everyone an opportunity. And oh my goodness, there's no way Ben would do that. Ben is a wonderful person. And so you'll have people that have close relationships, and maybe they're either willing to overlook things or just, again, it's this maybe being a little naive. Like I said, no, Ben is a stand-up guy. He would never do that. We kind of see that. Lack of internal controls, that's always an issue. In any of my cases, it's been a lack of internal controls. No one is looking at the records. No one's watching the records. Again, the inflated enrollment, quite a few cases, well, not quite a few, but one or two cases in the last 5 years of increasing enrollment numbers. And then conflict of interest is always a big one. Like I said, where you have these family members or close friends and relatives who are benefiting, and it's not disclosed. Indicators to look out for: having only one person in control. And unfortunately, with charter schools, you see that sometimes, where there's not enough staffing, there's no separation of duties. Again, you see family members, when you, especially, and Hawaii isn't an example where it's a smaller community, and so there's multiple family members working at a school. Not saying that's a crime, just there's close relationships, lack of internal controls, ignoring them, history of no prior audits. When we see a high turnover of personnel, and it isn't till years later, maybe an audit's done and it's like, oh my God, this was never looked at. We just didn't have the staffing to look at it. Unexplained entries. And that's an example, the case in Utah with the bookkeeper. she went on annual leave or sick leave. She never took leave. All of a sudden she went on leave, and the director of the program was looking at the records or opens the mail and saw a credit card bill. And that's kind of how it came to light. Large payments in cash, missing documentation, again, altered records. If you don't have someone reconciling the records, unauthorized transactions, and you'll see that, the credit card, the school credit card being used inappropriately. Or one of the charter school cases I had, the rule was you could only have the one school credit card. Well, it turns out someone had 10 credit cards. So just, and again, how can I say this appropriately? So the director of the charter school was also the director of the nonprofit. And again, there's one person in control of everything. And that's not always, it can be a recipe for disaster. Related party transactions and repeated audit findings, and there are no remedies in place to correct it. So here in the Western region, these are just 3 cases I'll talk to you quickly about, so we have time for questions. Southwest Learning Center, it was actually a case I worked in New Mexico back in 2014, so it's been a while. You could probably Google it and find out more about it and who it was. At times we try and sanitize these PowerPoints and leave out names. I guess we're trying to be politically correct, I guess. But from 2000 to 2014, the head administrator, and I'll have to look this way, sorry. So it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There were 4 charter schools, and he was the director. He actually founded the charter school. And what he had done is he had entered into these contracts and agreements with third-party vendors to obtain goods and services for himself. Like he was personally benefiting from all these third-party contracts that he had entered into. And some of the contracts weren't even like related to the school. And this is an example again of having one person in charge, no oversight over that person. Being the head of the school, he was able to submit false contracts and invoices, and then the school would, pay for the goods and services. At one time, just some examples, he had used $199,000 in school funding to pay down his personal line of credit. This school had a aviation program. He was a pilot, and turned out he was fueling his own plane. And not like it wasn't benefiting the students. He was using it to take his own personal trips. He transferred $50,000 to his personal bank account, spent $4,000 in a casino. I think he hired Lady of the Night for his son's birthday in 2017. So finally, so you can see this was discovered in 2014, and it wasn't until 2017 that he pled guilty to what's called an information. And the information happens when basically the federal government says we have enough to indict you, and the person says, okay, I'll plead guilty. And it's when the prosecutors, as I say, get together and do their song and dance with defense attorneys, and the individual pleads guilty to, instead of facing an indictment by a grand jury. This individual was sentenced to 60 months, and restitution was ordered in the amount of $3 million. This was a matter worked with FBI in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And again, you can see the years, how long it took. It truly takes a lot of manpower, a lot of work. Here's a 3-4 year investigation, very time and document intensive. This matter was reported via an individual within the school. So there was someone in their budget office who noticed some odd things occurring and reported it to the FBI. And that's how that got started. And we were involved because it received federal funding from Department of Education. And then next, Bradley Academy of Excellence. This is a case in Goodyear, Arizona. Again, you could Google it and you'll see lots of press articles about it. The CEO, principal, and vice principal. And this wasn't my investigation. I don't always like to speak to other people's investigations, but just to give you an insight of kind of what we do. And these cases, unfortunately, really happen. But again, like I said, the principal, and this was a case where false students, they called them Casper students, ghost students, to the tune of 2.6 million. Let's see, and again, the CEO of the school supported his lavish lifestyle and 4 nonprofits that he funded. And we see that quite a bit. It's either like a shell company or a nonprofit, quote unquote, consulting service company. And they'll maybe have a friend, like unbeknownst to us until you're into the investigation, it's a friend who created this nonprofit, and this person, the CEO in this case, may use it to make it appear as if this entity is legitimately consulting with the school. And then it's through financial analysis that at the end of the day, you see the CEOs benefiting. This individual was sentenced to 4 years, and the principal 3.5 or 3.75 years, and vice principal 4 months jail time. Again, I'm not very familiar with, except that it was worked jointly with US Department of Agriculture. So I know in cases I've worked in Hawaii, when they're doing the Title I formula, at times they'll use the free lunch statistics and data to help determine the Title I formula. I'm not sure if that's the case here. I know in Hawaii, that's how they determine Title I funding. And last but not least, Celerity Charter School. Again, you can Google it and find lots of press. This was worked by one of our investigators. Actually, it was 2 investigators in our Long Beach office. The founder, again, unfortunately, it's a common theme. It's a founder of a school or the head of the school, was sentenced to 30 months in prison. Again, used 3.2 in public funding to have her luxurious lifestyle, used the school's credit card to fund her own personal enrichment. Let's see, and it looks like the funds were used to renovate an office building in Ohio, where she planned on opening another charter school. And it tells, so we work with the Los Angeles Unified Charter School Division, and Los Angeles Unified School District has an Office of Inspector General. They referred the matter to us, and it was a joint investigation. It was actually a very large investigation. I think Secret Service was involved in the investigation, and the Postal Inspection Service was. And again, it's if Secret Service was involved, it leads me to believe there might have been some identity theft, or the credit card fraud. Secret Service works a lot of that. And so again, a joint effort truly takes a team to work these investigations. And at the end of the day, it's always unfortunate, because it's the children who lose out. You know, the taxpayers, that's also unfortunate, because we all pay our taxes. But again, it's at the end of the day, the children lose. And pathways to success. Why are all of you important? Because you are eyes and ears. You are there. Some of you, especially school employees, I'm here in Denver, Colorado. You're there in Utah, either working with the charter schools or you're working at a charter school, and you hear and see things that can help detect and prevent fraud. So it's people who are actually in the mix who are a critical role in fraud detection. Just a quick blurb about uniform guidance, Code of Federal Regulations, and I cited it there. Grantees and subgrantees must take prompt action when instances of non-compliance are identified. A lot of times there's a requirement, like I mentioned before, to notify the state. It's also important that you notify a program office, or you can notify the OIG hotline. I'll provide my contact information. It also mentions, violations of federal criminal law involving fraud, bribery, need to be disclosed in a timely manner to the U.S. Department of Education, and significant development. So if there's a delay in use of grant funding, if an entity can't meet the grant objective, it needs to be reported so that whatever appropriate remedies can occur to ensure that money is appropriately spent. And let's see, why report fraud? There's a statutory and regulatory requirement that I just told you about. We have an ethical responsibility. I always say integrity is what we do when no one's watching. So it's important to report, deter others from committing fraud and abuse, it should say not just Title IV, that's my bad there, protect the integrity of Department of Education programs. One, you don't want to be part of a fraud scheme, prevent administrative action, avoid civil penalties, and prevent criminal prosecution. So there is a statute, 18 USC 4, miss a prison of a felony, which says whoever having knowledge of the actual commission of a felony cognizable by a court of the United States, whether conceals, does not as soon as possible make known to the same to some judge or other person in civil or military authority under the United States shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 3 years or both. I would say, just if you see something wrong, report it. What can you do? Ensure your staff receives necessary training, review documents, don't take things at face value. Don't be afraid to question and verify the authenticity of something. Like I mentioned before, that bookkeeper, I have never seen such a good, what was it? It was I can't think of it off the top of my head. It was a credit card statement, American Express, and it was so well done. It looked completely legitimate. So request additional information. I joke, if your gut tells you something's not right, well, you might be on the path to knowing that maybe something needs looked at more closely. Compare information on different documents. Don't tip off subjects of a pending or actual investigation. Unfortunately, people think they want to help. And I would say, if I ever work with you, please, please, please just let me do my job and help where you can. But otherwise, we've got it from here, kind of, and continue your normal course of business. And that's the hard part when you're part of a 3-year investigation and you're a witness in it and you're like, oh my God, when is the government going to move on this? So just step aside, and when say I ask you for documents, turn them over, but don't just go about your normal course and let us handle the investigative side of it. contact us if you support fraud, and cooperate if you're involved with an audit or investigation. And just real quick, our hotline, we'll have a school referral. Our at OIG, there's a group at headquarters that will evaluate them. At times we don't pursue all of them, and it could be, either there's information lacking or evidence just isn't there. But you'll see there's different avenues. It could be it's not something we would look at, so we'll refer it either to a local or state agency. At times we'll refer it to our audit services, because it may be like a participation eligibility thing that isn't going to result in a criminal or civil matter. Or we report it to a program office like, hey, again, this isn't something we're going to be able to pursue. However, we feel 21st century learning out in Utah needs to be looked at more closely or something. That's kind of how we handle things. Here's my contact information. Just please report fraud if you see it. In the event, there's our hotline number, there's my contact information. If I can't work it, then someone within the Western region, like I said, there's 7 of us right now. We're looking to hire more. And hopefully at some point we can be a help. And that's it. Any questions?
Special Agent Ennis, we did have one question come in through the chat, but also if there's anybody else listening that wants to go ahead, unmute and turn on your video and ask a question, I'm sure Agent Ennis would be happy to help out. The one in chat is, what is the reason, justification, or intent behind having the OIG exempt from FERPA?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's, because we're the investigative branch of Department of Education, therefore, I think it's a need to access the records. So even the audit function, if they're coming in to do an audit, they need access to the records. And I can give you an example of one of the matters I worked in another state. There was an enrollment issue. And so we needed to find out, and we needed to interview parents. And so we had to go to the state and say, look, we need the enrollment records for this charter school, because the allegation was the school was creating ghost records. And therefore we needed student records to verify if they actually attended. So it's the fact that an entity's giving U.S. Department of Education funding, we need access to the records, and therefore we're exempt. But we have to take very close precautions, especially with student records. It's not like we receive them and leak them to social media or something. It's just a need to access the records. Therefore, we're exempt.
Thank
I
you.
think that answers the question. Was that it? That was easy. Nope, I see another one. Was there another one?
I don't have any in the chat. Does anybody have any more questions for Agent Ennis?
It's a quiet bunch. They're ready.
It is.
Day.
I have a question if we have a minute. This is Brad Nelson. I'm a financial director at Spectrum Academy Charter Schools here in Utah. What is the vetting process for complaints? Because as well as legitimate complaints, you also receive, I'm sure, false complaints or vindictive complaints or matters such as that. And is there a vetting process? So every time a complaint is made, it isn't, guilty until proven innocent, and the school or the entity is required to go through and jump through all the hoops and prove that they're innocent. Is there a vetting process for complaints?
Well, vetting being, so I'm provided an allegation, and they're called SIGI standards, basically standards saying, okay, this investigator's given this allegation. You have 120 days to determine the merits of the allegation. And we tend to do that through interviews. Basically I'm the vetter of the allegation. And I hopefully, you determine very quickly on whether or not it is a disgruntled parent, or not so much, Title IV fraud is, oh, my ex-spouse took out all these student loans. The onus is on me to kind of drill down into the allegation to basically clear it and say, yeah, these allegations are unmerited, or yeah, we have something questionable here. Whether it be like what I was talking earlier, you've got the school, this charter school, and there's all these what appear to be shell companies, and the onus is on me to track down these shell companies. And that's where it could be, I say through my investigation, you know what, this isn't passing the sniff test, and therefore I need records via an OIG subpoena. OIG subpoenas actually require notification. So let's say something's fishy at a school and I want to look at their bank records. If I do an OIG subpoena, the school is going to be notified. Where, like I mentioned before, grand jury is secret. I can go to a prosecutor and say, we have this allegation at charter school ABC. I've conducted a couple interviews, or say you're the perfect person. You're in this position of, you have access to financial records, and you're saying, you know what, director here, it appears maybe he's paying himself through these consulting services. And so I go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, things just aren't passing the sniff test. Can we get subpoenas? And they say, okay. And that's what's called grand jury. And then things are secret. So let's say I am able to get bank records for the charter school. And let's say you brought this allegation forward. I can't share that information with you. It is secret. I'm bound by the grand jury to not say anything and to conduct my investigation in a fair and impartial manner. And I wish I could give you, an example of, let's say 50% of the time allegations come in and there are no merits. Unfortunately, I can't. I mean, there's usually always something, except in like the whole family thing, or again, you'll get charter schools in very small communities, and you'll get a group of people together who, for whatever reason, there's contention. At those times, then you're like, okay, there's no merits to these allegations. I don't know. I wish I had, I wish I could say definitively, usually there's merits, 90% of the time, but unfortunately, no. And like I said, at times we will receive an allegation and then it's like, okay, there's nothing criminal going on here. However, we believe the program office within the department might want to look at this. And the department may say, nope, there's nothing there. And the department has no requirement to come back and say, this is what we're doing. There may be some instances where we require them to let us know, but a lot of times it's like, here's the referral to the program office and take action as you deem appropriate, if that explains it. So, the investigator will hopefully do their due diligence and determine the merits to the allegations. That's it. Did I answer that or no?
You did, thank you. And I appreciate that, because there are other federal agencies, when they receive a report, automatically in form letter request a 19-page request of information before any vetting is done, and it makes for a whole lot of work. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
We had another question, Agent Ennis, in the chat.
Okay.
It says, do the people reporting have to provide you any evidence with their allegation, or does the simple allegation initiate the preliminary investigation for you?
The allegation initiates it, but it's probably going to then be a follow-up from me or someone else saying, okay, can we have a phone call, or can I come meet you? And what makes you think that this is happening? Anyone can report it, but what's going to help is if you do have evidence, supporting your allegation, but it's not a requirement. And I will say, I'm trying to think, like, I've been here 11 years. I've worked quite a few allegations where we have had school employees contact us and say, this reading program, there's something not right about it. And so we have to look it, just by the nature of it being reported, we have to look at it. But any additional information you can provide is very beneficial.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're just a little over time. If anybody has any last questions, now would be the time to ask it of Agent Ennis. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Very much so.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close the meeting out here, but appreciate the time you spent with us. And I think we've all learned a little something more about what we can do to help prevent some misuse of funds or fraudulent activity. And we definitely know who to contact now. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.